West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goët.
I will not repeat the mistakes we've made in the past. Mistake of staying and fighting indefinitely in a conflict that is not in the national interest of the United States. Of doubling down on a civil war in a foreign country. Of attempting to remake a country through the endless military deployments of U.S. forces. It is not what the American people want. It is not what our troops, who have sacrificed so much over the past 2 decades, deserve.
In his remarks on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, President Biden acknowledged that as commander-in-chief, the buck stops with him. But as he faces attacks from the right and unrelenting criticism from the media, it's important to remember that this withdrawal, again, didn't begin under his administration. It was Biden's predecessor who not only set the plan in motion, but who continued to defend it over just this summer.
I started the process. All the troops are coming back home. They couldn't stop the process. 21 years is enough, don't we think? 21 years. They couldn't stop the process. They wanted to, but it was very tough to stop the process.
Joining me now is David Corn, Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones and the author of a new newsletter, This Land, and Tom Nichols, contributing writer for The Atlantic. One of my favorite contrarians, Tom. I want to go with you first. I find it ironic, right? The one thing that sort of Trump-curious liberals liked about him and found not objectionable about him was this thing he would say about no more endless wars. They agreed with that, right? And now it is ironic in a way that it's Biden. Let me play this for you. This is Biden voicing the white nationalist version of America First, pretty bluntly in his interview with CBS. Take a listen.
But then don't you bear some responsibility for the outcome if the Taliban ends up back in control and women end up losing the rights?
No, I don't. Look, are you telling me that we should go into China go to war with China because what they're doing to the Uyghurs, 1 million Uyghurs out in the West in concentration camps? The responsibility I have is to protect America's national self-interest and not put our women and men in harm's way to try to solve every single problem in the world by use of force.
I mean, like it or not, Tom, I think most Americans agree with that.
And that's why we're pulling out. I mean, the criticism here is that Biden is screwing up the execution of an idea that everybody wants to do. I think he's going to have to own that. I think this will be a case study in a bad policy execution of a good policy for a long time to come, because the more immediate things about are there enough, did we get enough people out? Are there enough planes? These are things that are within Biden's control, and he can't lay them off on his predecessor. But Biden is right that, the American people, insofar as they seem to care about this, or when they choose to care about it, have consistently said for 3 or 4, really, if you count the end of Bush's administration, that, to every president, we want you to leave this place. And every president says, well, I'd really like to, but I can't because of bureaucracy and alliance issues and military advice and so on. And Biden finally just said, okay, I'm going to give you what you want. And now there are people saying, well, I didn't really want that. I didn't know that, pulling out was going to look like this. Well, there was no version of this that ended differently. There were versions of it that maybe ended with less bloodshed and less horror and less, just chaos on the ground. But the Taliban taking over this country again, that was what, the American public, whether it realized it or not, that's what they said they preferred over staying there.
Yeah, and also the Taliban is not like they're different now than they were before. This is how they are, right? So this is what one should have expected. David, the thing that is very difficult to listen to is Republicans, screaming that, there should be, Kevin McCarthy ripping the strategy, calling for investigations. He won't even investigate the January 6th insurrection. Some other random Republican, Jeff Van Drew, saying Biden, Kamala Harris, and Speaker Pelosi all should resign. Rick Scott, the guy who took a bunch of money, his company took a bunch of money from Medicaid and Medicare and TRICARE. Serious questions of Joe Biden's removal from office. None of these people care about this. It's hard for me to listen to because you had 16 House Republicans vote against more visas for Afghan allies. They didn't want those people to come here. Now they're acting like they care so much about them. You had the Mike Pompeo posing in a picture with the guy who's now running Afghanistan saying, look at this great deal that we put together. This was Trump's policy and they loved it. Now they're deleting all of their tweets. And even Trump is deleting his. There it is. There's Mike Pompeo. Your thoughts, David?
Of course, Trump last year wanted to have a summit with the Taliban on 9/11 at Camp David. And, people thought, well, he finally was talked out of that. For 20 years, the American public has been fed nothing but lies. I hate to say that, nothing but lies about Afghanistan, about what we could do there and what we couldn't do there. You referenced this earlier on in the show, the story that Washington Post did in 2019. Doug Lute, who was the Afghan czar for both the George W. Bush administration and Barack Obama, in 2015 told government interviewers, we don't know what we're doing, we have no clue, we're devoid of a fundamental understanding of what's happening in Afghanistan. And he was the guy in charge. And so now we get to this point where, none of those Republicans who are speaking out now, and many of the Democrats actually too, never cared about the steady flow of lies. It was, I have to say this, was bipartisan. It happened during the Obama-Biden administration as well, that Joe Biden was part of. So I think, we have never had an honest debate, an honest discussion in this country. So we're not prepared to look at what's happening now, which is horrific. And I feel for the Afghans, and I do think there are questions about the implementation of this policy. But we've never given a real damn collectively as a nation about what's going on there, about the war, even the warriors who served, who come back to silence and without much coverage in the media that we're all part of. To see the Republicans now trying to exploit the lies, the ignorance, the uncaring, just to score political points, while Afghans are truly, in a troubled condition. I want to say, Joy, I'm surprised, but I'm not.
Yeah, surprise is dead, along with irony. I mean, look, the RNC had a piece up that you now get a 404-page error that was touting the withdrawal, right? So it's kind of difficult to see it. I just want to know, what's the over-under on how fast the pivot goes, Tom, from we have failed the Afghans to you can't bring 20,000 of those people here. They're Muslim, right?
Well, that's a sucker bet because it's already happening. There are Republicans already saying can't bring those people here. You can't flood the United States with these terrible immigrants. The idea that the Republicans were like, hey, that out of this is as predictable as a sunrise. Part of the problem, and I think this is the problem that Biden faced, and I think really I'll even say that Trump faced. The American public pretty much wanted to make decisions about this war based on wherever they think their political opponents weren't.
Right.
And their biggest concern was, well, if the other guy might get credit and this is something that makes me look like I'm agreeing with somebody else, then I've got to pick the other thing. And, the American public does not have a stable set of preferences about this other than a kind of general reflex of getting out. I'll take issue with David about one thing, about the lies. People like General Lute said this stuff in public. This wasn't like, some secret conclave behind the doors of the Pentagon. And the American public sort of shrugged and went, okay, well, but, there's no more terrorist attack, and it's all being done by volunteers, and I don't want to think about it. I have TV to watch, and that really is on us.
And the reality is, the way you know about it is that after we got bin Laden during the Obama administration, most Americans didn't give Afghanistan another thought until right now, when they're looking through their politics to see how do I need to feel about this based, as you said, on where your politics are. Just like with the vaccine, it's just bananas.
It is Tuesday, the 17th of August of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. Yes, it always has, and it always will. Okay, well, looks like the war is over and it's just started up again. Isn't that weird? Yeah, well, it is Afghanistan after all, and it's only been this way since before Moby Dick was written. Herman Melville warned about what would happen in Afghanistan if we ventured into that area way back when he wrote Moby Dick. It's in the introduction. I remember reading it when I was in junior high and commenting to my friends about it. Because even then, back in the late 60s, Afghanistan was in the news. Well, they say that's where empires go to die. That's like saying that the Mayans and the Aztecs had celestial space alien help to build their pyramids. It's just stupid. Quite colonialist, if I might add. Anyway, maybe we need to just leave that mountainous region alone. looks like Vlad's already on it. He's trying a different tack this time. Yeah, they did get into a quagmire, and the whole Soviet Union collapsed pretty much because of it. The men and materiel spent in Afghanistan certainly had a major impact on the Soviet economy and just society and its well-being generally. So, old Vlad being KGB, I think he's going to try a different tact. But, he's sidling up to the Taliban and giving them a little bit of advice. Apparently, he's brokered a deal where they won't attack and kill his people at the embassy, their embassy. We'll see how that goes. But just makes one wonder. Makes one wonder what real secret deal went on between the Taliban and Donald Trump. Off the books, by the way. He did that a lot. I still want to know also what secret deal he brokered with Vlad that Joe will have to fix. Now, let's be clear. Afghanistan was not Donald Trump's fault. The fault there lay with Bushco. And I just wish that a lot of these former Bushco employees who have speaking gigs on the various cable shows might mention that fact. You don't ever hear Bush or Cheney in any of these conversations. You hear Obama, you hear Trump, and you hear Joe, but you never hear GW and Dick. Who was it that said, must have been Rumsfeld, we make our own? Oh, no, it was Rove. I apologize, Rove. Bush's friend. We make our own reality. And then when you were all trying to catch up, we're on to another reality. In other words, they're Nazis and they make it up. Sort of how the GOP scrubbed their webpage. I'm looking at you, Rona. She still won't call herself a Romney. She scrubbed the webpage where Trump took credit for brokering the peace with the Taliban. He even at speeches said that, as soon as we bug out, the Taliban's going to take over the government, and I told him they could. Okay. I don't think he really had to tell them they could, but I like the little flourish because it's, to me, if I was a cop, that's a confession. Indeed. So, police brutality in the streets continues. The Proud Boys taking over an anti-vax, I think they glommed on to this anti-vax protest, which I got to tell you is not much different than what we saw last summer with the roving caravans of ISIS trucks. Proud Boys in L.A. went to, well, actually, they were Bakers. I heard they were Bakersfield Proud Boys. Anyway, showed up at this anti-vax rally in front of City Hall and, of course, the cop station right next door, LAPD. And they proceeded to beat the crap out of anybody who was counter-protesting their involvement with these anti-vaxxers and journalists. While the cops did nothing. And what did the cops talk about? They said, hey, we heard two groups were going at it. One of them was Antifa, so we just we laid back. There was no Antifa there. Give me a break. What is Antifa? Anti-fascist. If the cops are against the anti-fascists, what does that make the cops? Well, anyway, on the heels of this is a video. Well, it looks like it could be from a telephone possibly, but a alleged suspect for, I believe, these protests, who was handcuffed to a gurney getting put into a ambulance. And this big old burly cop comes over and starts beating the crap out of the kid while he's laying down. Handcuffed. Injured. Already out of it. And I guess a couple of good apples pulled him back and said, don't do that. Yeah, good apples. Give me a break. And the comment that is constant throughout the Twitterverse and other social media platforms is, you can't reform this. No, you can't. It has to be purged. I gotta tell you, if there's 20 cops and 10 of them are bad cops and the other 10 don't say anything, you got 20 bad cops. Just saying. Okay, well, let's get into this curated part of our show, because we do always have a curated part of the show to sort of, ground us so we don't go too far off the precipice. At the top, of course, no one was really surprised that the GOP would be using Afghanistan for political points. This was all the plan of Bushco. Put the debacle in the lap of a Democratic president. Let them figure it out. Let them get the blame. And that's exactly what is happening. And the pundit class seems only too happy to finally have something they can say that Joe's effing up. But my retort to that would be, is he really effing up? Oh, you might say the logistics wasn't well planned. Well, I'm pretty sure Joe tasked our military, who apparently was unable to win the war for 20 years, with getting a plan to get us bugged out. So they're trying to make this Joe's Jimmy Carter helicopters crashed in the desert scene. When Jimmy sent some helicopters to rescue the hostages that the Iranians were holding. Our hostages from the embassy there. And some Canadians, too. But he sent some helicopters, and a desert sandstorm came up and crashed, filled up all the jet intakes of these turboprops, and they crashed, killing the task force, the SEAL team or Rangers, whoever it was at the time. I apologize to those who know better, and I'm still honoring their sacrifice. But that was blown up out of proportion as an example of how inept Jimmy Carter was. He couldn't be a war president. Look at him. He's such a weakling. Yeah, he was a commander of a nuclear submarine during Korea. Give me a break. Yeah. So they're trying to make this the crashed helicopter in the desert Jimmy Carter scene. They're trying to find a chink in Joe's armor to bring him down. But I think that a lot of us are a lot more awake to, what's up. We've been through this. And I think people are onto it. Especially since we had an insurrection last January that continues to this very day. So no one's surprised. No one's surprised at all what the GOP will do. On the rest of the menu, speaking of which, New Hampshire's GOP governor gave millions in pandemic school relief funds to a for-profit education company. Well, he's just being fair and balanced now, isn't he? U.S. officials declared the first ever water shortage from a river that serves 40 million people in the West. Just a small trifle. And the Biden administration appealed a federal court decision to block its pause of oil and gas leasing, during a climate crisis. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Colombia reissued Interpol Red Notices for 3 more ex-FARC members. And wildfires raged outside Athens, Greece, as villages were hastily evacuated. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page from the chat room link to the left, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it would help so much. Many of you have, and it's been so helpful. Thank you so much. And I feel a bit embarrassed, but I must be forthright and inform you that we need more. We need more of you. So if you could afford, how about an espresso-type coffee drink? I don't know where I came up with that. Thank you, Blue Gal. But if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds to us once a month, we're able to pool those dollars with what we pull out of our own wallets, and then we pay our bills, and we fly under the radar, and we continue this powerhouse of resistance. It's not just West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. It's not just David Waldman's show before us or Kelly's show on Saturdays. It's not any of those. We have so much content that we've been broadcasting for, over 10 years now. It's been sad. Some that we started off with have fallen by the wayside, unfortunately, because life does intrude upon the best of plans now, doesn't it? But we persevere because of your generosity. And I must add, we have a true feeling of civic duty to resist this now turning out to be a violent takeover of the American dream. And the whole American politic itself. Can't have it happen. So your generosity monthly helps us fulfill that civic duty as the founders originally intended, oh so many, many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, please do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. And I like to pronounce the D sometimes in radio also. Thank you, Tom. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, it is so simple as well. You just go to Justice Putnam. You have to know how to spell justice. Putnam is the N-A-M, man spelled backwards. And you can find me there. I post the show notes and links diary about 10 minutes before showtime, and then I get that linked up on social media like Twitter and others that you know who they are. Those show notes and links are really an integral part to the storyline because that's where the real reportage is. It is. Everything else could be construed as in this reporter's opinion. Thank you, George Putnam. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, you can do so at Cookbook West. And please, please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. I don't know what's up with YouTube. I'll post, once again, I'll post a PSA from the Ad Council, the CDC, and it gets flagged every single time as medical disinformation that goes against the World Health Organization and some amorphous entity they call local authorities. And I don't know who those local authorities are. I guess maybe local authorities in my county, the county that's leading the state in infections, who refuse to admit that we have a pandemic. You mean I'm violating their standards? Okay, YouTube, I think you need to fix your algorithm. I just had merely, for instance, on Facebook, I just had vaccines, just the word vaccine, in a post. And I get the little, which is fine because there's a lot of disinfo, but you get the little box that says, if you'd like to have adequate and accurate information on the pandemic and other issues, here's a link to the CDC. And Facebook would suspend me for posting CDC recommendations because I was, harassing and bullying anti-vaxxers with, official information. That's how it works. Anyway, what's up with YouTube? We know what's up with YouTube. It's what's up with, behind every artificial intelligence is a human being with all their weaknesses, frailties, liabilities, lack of humanities and, studies of humanities in college. I think every coder should be required to take humanities. And a stats class, too. It'll really help. Indeed. Okay. Am I getting to be a taciturn old fella? Yeah. Not always taciturn. Not always. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the American Independent by Josh Israel. New Hampshire received about $156 million from the December pandemic relief bill for school relief. And Republican Governor Chris Sununu unilaterally decided to send, $6 million of that to a for-profit company that operates homeschooling pods. The Bipartisan Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act contained $13.5 billion in elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, known as ESSER II. Under the law, states were required to distribute 90% of their share of those funds to local education agencies. The other 10% could be used to address emergency educational needs created by the COVID-19 pandemic. In March, Sununu instructed his Department of Education to issue a no-bid contract to spend $2 million of those funds in 2021 and $4 million more in 2022 on Prenda's Recovering Bright Futures program. According to the department website, the micro school company will give localities, quote, the opportunity to provide students with access to learning pods starting this fall, end quote. The pods will be 5 to 10 elementary or middle school age students taught by Prenda's employees in school buildings or other public locations. According to Prenda's site, the educators it provides for these pods are not teachers, but guides, like a trail guide. These requirements to become one of these guides are minimal. They must be at least 18, pass a criminal background check, be certified in CPR and first aid, and have some facility with technology, and have 6 months of experience, paid or unpaid, working with children other than your own in the last 5 years, and volunteering counts. We don't need teachers to teach these kids. We'll have some kids teaching these kids. Babysitters. That's all teachers are anyway, is babysitters. Under the contract, the company will receive $5,000 per pupil. The amount is higher than the $3,700 per student payments the state provides to local schools in the adequacy aid money to ensure each receives an adequate public education. Though the Sununu administration claimed these largely unregulated micro schools are particularly helpful to students who have experienced learning loss and will thrive with more individualized attention, little data is available to indicate how effective they are. Prenda's website says they have provided services for about 4,000 kids to date. Prenda is backed by multiple nonprofits linked to petrochemical billionaire Charles Koch. Well, that's one way to describe him. And a Sununu spokesperson did not immediately respond to an inquiry for this story. Of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. U.S. officials yesterday, Monday, declared the first ever water shortage from a river that serves 40 million people in the West, triggering cuts to some Arizona farmers next year amid a gripping drought. Water levels at the largest reservoir on the Colorado River, Lake Mead, have fallen to record lows. Along its perimeter, a white bathtub ring of minerals outlines where the high water line once stood, underscoring the acute water challenges for a region facing a growing population and a drought that is being worsened by hotter, drier weather brought on by climate change. States, cities, farmers and others have diversified their water resources over the years, helping soften the blow of the upcoming cuts. But officials said Monday's declaration makes clear that conditions have intensified faster than scientists predicted in 2019, when some states in the Colorado River Basin agreed to give up shares of water to maintain levels at Lake Mead. The announcement today is a recognition that the hydrology that was planned for years ago, but we hoped we would never see, is here, said Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner Camille Touton. Lake Mead was formed by the building of Hoover Dam in the 1930s. It is one of several man-made reservoirs that store water from the Colorado River, which supplies household water, irrigation for farms, and hydropower to Arizona, California, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, and parts of Mexico. Volkovici of Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Biden administration yesterday, Monday, challenged a federal judge's decision in June to block the Interior Department's pause on oil and gas leasing on public lands and waters, a critical piece of its climate change policy, but will proceed with leasing during the appeals process. The Interior Department aims to overturn the decision of Judge Terry Doughty of the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Louisiana, who said Louisiana and a dozen states that sued Joe Biden's administration established they would suffer injury from the pause on new oil and gas leases. Those states last week sought a court order from the judge to force Interior to hold an offshore lease sale this year, and yesterday, Monday, the American Petroleum Institute and 11 other industry groups sued the administration to force them to reinstate lease sales, which had not resumed after the judge's June decision. The appeal of the preliminary injunction is important and necessary. Together, federal onshore and offshore oil and gas leasing programs are responsible for significant greenhouse gas emissions and growing climate and community impacts, the Interior Department said in a statement. Biden had paused the government's new leases in January as part of a sweeping plan to rein in fossil fuel extraction on federal land and combat the effects of climate change. The Interior Department said it will proceed with new leases during the appeals process, consistent with the district court's injunction during the appeal, and will use discretion provided under the law to conduct leasing in a manner that takes into account the program's many deficiencies. The agency acknowledged that its current leasing program and royalty rates do not adequately incorporate consideration of climate impacts and the breadth of the Interior Secretary's stewardship responsibilities. The agency said it will address the shortcomings through several steps, including completing a report outlining reform recommendations. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland said earlier this year that the highly anticipated report would be released in the early summer, but it has not yet been published. The department also will undertake a programmatic analysis to ensure that federal leasing meets Biden's targets of cutting greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030, and announced it will also release a notice of intent to review the federal coal leasing program later this week. They are being put on notice. All right, that brings us to our break. And we better go to our break. And when we get back from said break, We will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Sarah Vitak. Modern medicine and bacterial pathogens are in an arms race. We use antibiotics to keep them at bay, and then they adapt to become immune to those antibiotics, evolving into superbugs. The battle has been an asymmetric one. We just don't have that many options in the fight. Most of our antibiotics come from bacteria, the vast majority from a single genus, Streptomyces. And most antibiotics use the same handful of strategies to attack bacteria. But there's a reason that we only use a tiny fraction of the antibiotic chemicals that exist in nature.
This search for completely new substances was unsuccessful for the past 30 years. It's very difficult to make sure that we find an antibiotic, so a substance that's produced by microorganisms and that's toxic to other microorganisms, but that is not toxic to humans.
Miriam Rosenbaum is a professor of synthetic biotechnology at the Hans Noll Institute in Germany. But how, if they're so hard to find, do scientists know that we have only found a tiny fraction of the antibiotic substances that exist in nature?
We do know that because for the past 20 years, we were in this biological revolution of sequencing.
Researchers like Rosenbaum have taken that revolution underground, literally. Like into the dirt.
And so with these environmental sequencing campaigns, we found out that actually the microbial world is much, much bigger than we thought it is. And this is how we know that we only have 5% in the lab. Because we see, just looking at the DNA in the soil sample, we see there are 95% more. That where are they? We don't have the cells. You know? We can know more than their name or more than their existence there. We see what genes they have.
They don't have the cells because only about 1 to 15% of the species of bacteria in nature can currently be grown in the lab. It's like dusting a room for fingerprints, only to find that the place is totally covered, and in ones that you don't have IDs for, and also that the party's still going all around you, but you can't see the guests. What Rosenbaum can tell from the sequences is that these unseen bacteria do make more and different kinds of antibiotics. So, which bacteria are making them? And is it possible to keep them alive long enough to make the ID? Rosenbaum's answer? Microscopic bacterial pool parties.
Slowly, over a long time, went smaller and smaller, and now we are at these picoliter size droplets, so 200 picoliters. That's way smaller than a milliliter that you can still see or a microliter that you can barely see. It's 1 million times smaller than these microliters. And so these picoliter droplets now are the houses for these microorganisms.
So microscopic water houses.
And we put one cell in one of these droplets. So every cell gets their own house. And then since these are so small, we can cultivate millions of these small droplets houses in one experiment. And so we take out of one soil sample of a few grams, we get millions of bacterial cells and we put them all in their individual house. And then we see what grows.
The work was published in the journal eLife. And what they found is that they were able to grow a completely different set of bacteria than what would normally grow using traditional cell culturing techniques.
Typically, we put them either in a shake flask that's like the size of a hand, and then we have a few microbial cells in there that are basically lost in an ocean, or we put them on an agar plate on a solid medium, while in the environment they don't grow in this type of environment.
Giving them their own private space to grow separately also probably helps.
To take them out of the competition, to give them all a chance to actually grow up and to grow without competition and without somebody producing antibiotics and fighting against them and so on.
And the micro waterhouses are proving to be very flexible incubators. They're tiny, so millions can be grown together in one test tube, and they can be manipulated. So they can be put onto agar plates individually, giving the bacteria a better shot at growing there, or they can be used to do experiments with different conditions inside of each different droplet. But the goal has always been to turn them into tiny antibiotic factories.
So we took all the droplets that had growth in them, and now we added an indicator bacterium that has a light label, a fluorescence label. If these indicator bacteria are able to grow and they are added to the droplet, then we get a light signal, a green or red signal of this droplet.
So red or green light coming from a droplet means the wild bacteria isn't producing antibiotic. Because if it was, that would kill the indicator bacteria in the drop. The color of the light conveniently tells the researchers what type of bacteria is still alive. But a dark droplet, so one without any light coming from it, means that the wild bacteria is killing the indicator bacteria, stopping it from growing and stopping it from producing the light. So it must be producing an antibiotic then.
Yeah, so we can select all the dark droplets and then deposit them. Now we want to get these cultures. We want to get whoever is producing the antibiotic. And now we want to get those out of the droplet.
This means that they can screen millions of bacteria for antibiotic properties pretty quickly and easily. Inside these microscopic bacterial pool parties, humans might just find an upper hand in the arms race against the superbugs. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Sarah Vitak.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
The census is coming. The census is coming.
I'm Tom Hartman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Actually, the census has arrived, and the attack on democracy has begun. A lawful attack because the Supreme Court in 2019 took a pass on overt partisan gerrymandering and gave politicians in power free rein to rig the system to keep themselves in power. And politicians are doing exactly that, using the new census to draw lines for congressional districts and state offices so that the election results as a practical matter will be determined before the votes are cast. Sophisticated computer algorithms make this possible to a high degree of certainty through a process called cracking and packing. For example, pack all the minority community votes into one district and then give all the rest of the districts to yourself, or alternatively split those votes into many districts so that they can have no real influence on election results. Both major political parties gerrymander, but Republicans now control the process in 20 states, as opposed to 10 for the Democrats, and the Republican-controlled states include Texas, Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina. Which means, as the New York Times recently reported, that without federal legislation to make the process fair, control of the House of Representatives in 2022 could be decided not through winning hearts and minds and political arguments or votes, but rather simply by drawing lines on a map.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because democracy and advocacy begin with you, and freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1985. That was the day that workers at the Hormel plant in Austin, Minnesota, went out on strike. They were members of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, Local P9. Hormel had slashed workers' wages by 23% during the early 1980s. Benefits were also diminished, and incentive programs rolled back. These changes cut deeply into the Hormel workers' earnings. What had been considered a good job was changing drastically. This was the story for many workers in Reagan-era America. The 3,500 Hormel workers voted overwhelmingly to strike. The National UFCW discouraged the action. The strike lasted more than a year. Strikebreakers were brought in, including some of the union members who crossed the picket line to return to work. The National Guard was called in to keep the peace between strikers and the scabs. After a year, the strike went down in defeat. Even after the strike, many of the workers were not called back to work. They were put on waiting lists for a job to reopen. Some never returned to the plant. 25 years after the strike, the Austin Daily Herald staff wrote, quote, "What resulted was a bitter, drawn-out labor dispute that drastically impacted the community, from workers who lost their jobs to families that were torn apart by the picket lines." The strike became the feature of a documentary by Barbara Koppel. In 1990, the documentary American Dream won the Academy Award. The film tells the story of the Hormel strike as a window into the tragic experiences of many workers during the 1980s. The film was made on a shoestring budget. Singer Bruce Springsteen provided $25,000 to help support this important film. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, quite pleasant. And it looks like we will be much, much cooler today. It looks like we're being forecast to only top out about 78 to 80. Considerably cooler than the 104 that we had yesterday. Which means that if we're forecast to be topping out about 78 to 80, it means it'll be about 85, which will be considerably cooler than the 104 that we had yesterday. So partly cloudy skies, winds will be out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies tonight with lows in the low 50s. So cool nights have returned. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and mainly sunny tomorrow with highs about 82, winds out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Well, as I mentioned before, Jackson County here in the southern part of Oregon, our confirmed coronavirus cases have been spiking. For some reason, many people refuse to wear masks or any of the other protocols that one would expect. So the updated totals have come in from the weekend. Our confirmed cases are now at 150,055, and our deceased have increased by 3 and now stand at 170. Jackson County, Josephine County, I think we need to have a talk. Well, grass pollen is rated as low right outside the window here in Rogue River proper, and the air quality index for the region is finally good at 49 parts per million. Oh, we can breathe again. And that daytime UV index is high as the angle of the sun decreases, and it is at 7. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.97 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles. And relative humidity is at 74%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 64 and cloudy. Paris is 67 and cloudy. Rome is 88 and fair with a heat advisory, so I guess they're going to get hotter than 95 today. And their heat advisories also include the caveat that it may impact critical infrastructure like the electrical grid. Kyiv is 91 and fair. Kabul is 80 and partly cloudy and fully taken over by the Taliban. Hong Kong is 80 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 77 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 53 and fair. San Francisco, California is 55 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York is 77 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Anonymous staff at Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Colombia has reissued Interpol Red Notices for 3 leading FARC dissidents, the country's police chief said, and called on Interpol member countries, including Venezuela, to arrest and extradite them. So-called FARC dissidents are former members of the Demobilized Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, who were guerrillas who rejected a 2016 peace deal with the government. The international arrest warrants were issued for Hernan Dario Velasquez, known as El Paisa, Henry Castellanos, known as Romana, and Jose Vicente Lesmes. Oh, I'm sorry for butchering your name, but he's known as Walter Mendoza. The 3 men are members of a FARC dissident faction led by Luciano Marin, who is better known as Ivan Marquez. Interpol Red Notices were issued for Marquez in August, while the United States has offered $10 million for information leading to his capture. Marquez, who was one of the FARC negotiators who signed the peace deal with the government, and the other leaders declared their rejection of the deal in 2019 and returned to arms. The dissident leaders face charges of drug trafficking, terrorism, homicide, forced displacement, and other crimes against humanity in Colombia.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
staff at Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. 2 wildfires, fanned by strong winds, raged out of control near Athens, forcing the evacuation of villages, but there were no immediate reports of casualties. More than 500 wildfires have broken out in recent weeks across Greece, which, like other countries in the Mediterranean region, including Turkey and Tunisia, has seen some of its highest temperatures in decades. Yesterday, Monday, a blaze broke out on a mountain near the port town of Lavrio, about 40 miles south of Athens, sending thick plumes of smoke above a busy beach where windsurfers were riding the waves. A separate blaze broke out in a forested area near the village of Vilia, north of the capital, close to a children's summer camp. 5 helicopters and 5 firefighting planes were dispatched there, and Vilia is just over 20 miles from Athens. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we'll meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.